Welcome into the Toronto Sports Rush right here on the Bet Rivers Network. Remember to like and subscribe. We've got a lot of great content for you. And today, the whirlwind that is Emily Kaplan from ESPN. She is everywhere during the Stanley Cup playoffs, during the hockey season. And she's finally slowed down enough for us to catch up with her for a few minutes. So, Emily, thanks a lot for the time today. We're going to kind of talk about some of these things that are going on in hockey, particularly as they relate to the Leafs. But first of all, have you caught your breath from the playoffs?
Absolutely not. And EJ, I'm so glad that we get to do this because typically when I see you on the road in the finals, you and I get like a nice 15, 20-minute catch up. We talk shop. And this year, for whatever reason, I only saw you just passing by through security. So we get to have our catch up here in front of everybody. So it's
That's
wonderful.
right. That's right. Well, listen, you continue to do great work at ESPN. So glad to see that. I mean, there's been talk about a whirlwind. Toronto Maple Leafs going back to, I guess, when they decided to move on from the general manager and then eventually the coach. And there's so many things that have happened. Let me just ask you about John Chayka. And like, are you that hiring surprised me? How did you feel about that hiring at the time?
I was surprised at as well. I think it kind of reminded me of when the Seattle Kraken got their expansion franchise, and so many people were interested in that job. And then you're like, okay, Ron Francis makes sense, but Dave Haxtell, like that's the coach, like interesting. And then you hear them explain, and you're like, okay, this makes sense of why they went there. And I almost feel that with Chayka, and I mean that as no disrespect. It's just not really a name that had been on my radar the last 2 years. Obviously, a bright mind, obviously made his mark in the league at a really young age with the Arizona Coyotes. And I think what we saw so many times in this league, and we're probably going to talk about it again with Jim Hiller, is when people get their opportunity for a second job, so many of the things they learned on the first job, they get to improve on. So I'm really excited to see what he's able to do. He had a lot of time away from the league, probably to reflect, to think on best practices, what I could have done better, what I'd like to do in my next opportunity. And this is a really big job, and there's a really big task ahead of him, but there's obviously a reason why the MLSC board trusted him, so I'm excited to see what he does with it.
Emily, that's you mentioned the second job, and I'm always a big, I don't want to say a big believer in it, but I think it is a good thing for someone to get a second chance, whether it be as a head coach in the National Hockey League or as a general manager, because in particular as a manager, I don't think there's any one role that prepares you for being a manager. I think really as I've watched over many years and kind of evolved in my thinking about it, I think the best skill you can have as far as being a general manager in the National Hockey League is the ability to manage people. I think there's a lot of other things you could hire people to help you with. So we'll see. I agree with you. I think that second chance is a good thing. I think we've seen before where people have done better in that second opportunity.
I mean, I think you could say that for general manager. You can really say that about any profession. When so many
Yeah.
young students ask me, "What's your advice for broadcasting?" and I say it's all about reps. I happen to get a lot of my reps on national TV on a pretty big stage, and so there was a growth curve, but luckily ESPN had patience with me and let me continue getting those reps so I could find my voice. I feel like in coaching, I hear it all of the time. Like people are so nervous for that first opportunity because they know that everyone's watching you and how are you going to act as a head coach. Lucky people get their second opportunity and they're more prepared for it. So John Chayka got his reps in Arizona, and now he's going to get a very big rep in Toronto with a lot of eyes on him.
What do you make of what's gone on so far under his short tenure, along with Matt Sundin? We might add. Can't forget about Matt Sundin in all this
Of
because I
course.
mean he is part of this as well, and he's another person that comes in. Let's face it, he was a great player. He's a Hall of Famer, but he didn't have a lot of managerial experience, so to speak, at the National Hockey League level. In fact, I believe he was living over in Sweden, so he wasn't really connected to the NHL directly. What do you make of what's gone on over the last 3 months or so?
Yeah, a couple early notes on their administration. One, I think they've done a very good job in a very gossipy league to keep things under wraps, to really surprise people, right? With the hire of Chaika, with the hire specifically of Jim Hiller, like how many of us saw that coming? The first trade that they did, the Joseph Wall trade, that landed them Emil Andre, many people didn't have that on their radar. We knew that they were probably going to touch goaltending in some way, but that specific trade just popped in my inbox and said, "Oh wow, it's done." So I think they've done a very good job there. Their biggest task right now is figuring out Austin Matthews. Is he on board? Is he aligned with our future? How do we get, aligned with him? And again, I think they've done that pretty quietly. Like I've checked in a bunch with Austin's camp, and I know there wasn't the big meeting in Arizona. It sounds like logistics were a reason, right? Matt's was moving his family over from Sweden. They've got scouting meetings. Austin is rehabbing from knee surgery, can't really get on a plane right now. But they've clearly had communication and are on board. And this Jim Hiller hire screams of, okay, Austin and Willie must have signed off on this because it's somebody that they know. So overall, I think it's been a positive first couple weeks, if I'm being completely frank. Like this could be a disaster again in
Yeah.
the Toronto media market. It can go wayward really quickly. And the fact that they've been able to control what's going on inside their office, control their messaging, and start to make some progress, it's really positive few weeks.
Yeah, I would say the ability just to keep things tight, I think in Toronto
Hmm.
is really a plus. I mean, that tells us a little something about what they're doing there. They're able to keep things so within their group, and in other organizations and other iterations of the Toronto Maple Leafs, it hasn't been so easy to do that.
No, completely. And look, I completely understand the hypocrisy here because I'm somebody who gossips for a living. Like it's my job to get people to give me information they don't
Yes.
want to give.
Uh-huh.
And I some often find in the NHL, it's a league where information can spread pretty quickly, but not as quickly as other leagues. And that's, I think, one of the things that's actually holding us back as a sport, that we need that ecosystem of information, those rumors, those trades, those transactions that the NFL and NBA have that keep their sports relevant for so long. I digress. If you want to run a successful organization, it's probably better if you keep it in house. If the first people to understand that information are the people directly involved, and so far they've been able to do that.
Yeah, that is true. It is one of those things, right? We want the information, but for the teams, it's best to try to keep it to themselves. So they've done. Have to say they've done a good job with that so far. Which brings me to Jim Hiller. You already mentioned like not a lot of people saw it coming. I heard his name mentioned amongst the many different names we heard kind of mentioned. I didn't put much stock in it. Maybe I should have put more stock in the fact that he had been in Toronto previously as an assistant coach for Mike Babcock there, and knew some of the key participants when you think of Matthews, Nylander, as you mentioned. So, what are we to make of Jim Hiller, who was the head coach with the LA Kings? He kind of came in after Todd McClellan was there. He kind of took over in midseason. He had a season. He lost in the first round of the playoffs twice. One of the second time, I didn't think it was a really good showing by him for a number of different reasons. But as we just talked about before, second opportunity, chance to do things differently. What do you think he brings to the table for the Leafs?
Well, I think in some ways he became a caricature in this league. I think that sometimes when someone gets fired, we only focus on the negatives, right? And the Jim Hiller era in Los Angeles was marked by that failed coach's challenge in the playoffs, which was just
Yep,
kind of a crazy challenge to have, and also
yep.
his system. It was a 1-3-1 that was pretty boring to watch from a defensive standpoint. Two things. One, you can only work with the personnel that you have. And if you look at that Kings roster, it is nowhere as near as dynamic as the Leafs roster is right now. And so I'm open minded to, okay, this might not be boring hockey. He'll be able to adapt and maybe figure out what best suits these guys. And for the coach's challenge, back to our original point, you live and you learn, right? Like I think
Yeah.
if he's put in that exact situation now in a playoff game, I think he probably understands this is the way the situation room thinks. This is the points of data that I have of how successful a challenge like this could be, and he probably wouldn't make it again. I think that he has a reputation, which obviously aligns with what Keith Pelly has outlined, why they hired John Chayka and probably Jim Hiller as well, being analytically minded. Analytics are a big part of what they want to do here, but it can't be the only thing, and you have to have a hockey mind. And he does seem to have that interpersonal relationship with hockey people, specifically guys and players, that will allow him to speak to them in a language that they can understand and translate to success on the ice.
What's interesting, Emily, is like they talk a lot about him, and he did have a relationship with those guys. There's no question. He was an assistant coach for a couple of years, and a lot of players have said that that they like working with Jim Hiller. But when you're an assistant coach, it's different than being the head coach, right? Like the assistant coach can be the nice guy and the guy that, works with you and is out maybe after practice with you. The head coach, it's a little different. And I can also remember during the playoffs where when that challenge happened and that kind of meltdown happened for the LA Kings, he had a little bit of a meltdown in a media. I mean, the LA Kings media market there is not exactly, banging down the
It's not
door every
Toronto.
day. Exactly. I mean, it's Dennis Bernstein and one or two other people. That's it. And like, so Toronto is different. How do you think you'll handle, being the head coach here where you can't always be the nice guy and dealing with the media on a day to day to day basis where in a big moment in LA, it was a little bit of a struggle?
It's a great point, and I think that's one of the reasons he became a caricature, and I hate using that
Yeah.
word, but it's kind of
Yeah.
true, right? Like, I think we just painted him in one
Yeah.
light, and it was because of that press the way he handled it as well, and messaging is so big a part of being a head coach, that that's probably one of the biggest areas where he learned how to handle that better, I might be frustrated, I might feel like I'm completely correct, and I might think that all the media here questioning me are idiots, but I can't let that show because I'm a leader of men. When I covered the NFL, it was so interesting to me because I saw the trend in hiring for head coaches, and it was always who's the hot assistant, who's doing this crazy defensive scheme or has a really, wonderful offensive, scheme, and they're brilliant and we're going to make them a head coach. And then they'd fail again and again. And it's like, well, because you can be so good at the X's and O's, but a head coach is a completely
Yeah.
different skill set and different just profile. And the head coach, again, it's a lot of messaging to your point. It's dealing with people, it's managing down, it's managing up to the owners, to the general managers. And I do think that once you've been through that once, you learn how to do it better. And I do think that having those established relationships with the players will help your message, but you have to also learn how to communicate with them differently because again, you're not going to be your buddy after practice talking about ice time. You're going to be having delivering the hard news sometimes.
Yeah, that's there's Emily. For me, there's guys I see coaching, and it really goes to all sports, but particularly in hockey, which I'm so focused on, is they have that assistant coach vibe. They're like a
Hmm.
really good assistant coach, and I've seen guys, like for me, Rick Tocchet was someone that I thought was really a good assistant coach, and then over the years, I think he's really evolved into a really good head coach now. So maybe that'll be the case for Jim Hiller, but I do think that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for him, particularly in dealing with guys that he already knows. That there will be times when it is a little bit harder, and that dynamic will have to change, right?
Completely. And I think that when I listened to Chayka talk about hiring Jim Hiller, they said that he had a detailed plan for everything. And so I imagine that the way that he communicates his messaging to players like Austin and Willie, who are so critical to their success and are so special as players that are really unicorns in this league, that had to be a huge part of his plan.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on what happens with Jim Hiller moving forward. You mentioned, and you've talked to the Austin Matthews camp. I talked to Judd, who's his agent, every once in a while as well. What do you think? Like, if things don't go well in the first 3 months of the season in Toronto, where do you think this goes? I mean, we're just speculating, but I mean, I would think if it doesn't go well the pressure of a move starts to come into play. I mean, is this an all or nothing type of season in that regard, do you think, for Matthews and the
All
Leafs?
or nothing in the Leafs. That seems like PTSD. You can't use that phrase anymore
I
on this
know, that's
show.
true. Yeah.
It's kind of tough to tell because Austin, I think, more than most superstars in the league, does keep things pretty close to the vest. The sense I get in talking to Judd and people around Austin is that he doesn't have the appetite to leave right now. I think he's still very loyal to Toronto and seeing it through, loves being the captain there, wants to win there. At the same time, he and the rest of those USA players got a taste of winning. And when you feel very far away from it, how do you not want to go chase that more? And how can you not look at, hey, these are the prime years of my career. What am I doing? Am I giving myself the best position for success? So I think Judd is training Austin, just as he trained Connor McDavid, to evaluate things in short term windows of like, hey, look, don't necessarily map out your entire career right now. Let's just think of what's the beginning of next season going to look like. How can we evaluate it? And so I do think if things go completely haywire in the first month or two, then maybe we bring Austin's name up again and trade chatter. And could he want to go to a different market where he has a better chance to win? But right now, I think his mindset, as best as I can understand, is let's get this Leafs season going. let's believe in the plan here and let's see where it goes.
Let me ask you about. I'll ask you about some gossip. Matthew Knies. He's an asset for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, in a perfect world, I think you'd want to keep Matthew Knies right on your roster, but he is, as they say, a valuable asset. The Leafs need to kind of retool their defense. I think that's their biggest area of concern is to get younger and faster on the blue line. What do you make of the talk that Knies could be moved? There was a discussion or a story about Knies maybe moved at the deadline. That did not happen. Where do you think they are with Matthew Knies?
I think he's an extremely coveted player around the league. We saw it with Vegas, not as much with Carolina, but typically in the playoffs, we start talking about these are the type of players you need in the playoffs. They're big, they're mean, they play a versatile game. And I just feel like Matthew, because he's so dynamic, right? He's got that offensive touch, he can be that big net front presence. Like he is that guy that so many teams are like, I need him as a missing piece. Like I live in Chicago. I know Chicago loves Matthew Knies. He would fit
Yeah.
perfectly in their plan, right? In terms of age, the way they want to grow with the Connor Bedards of the world, being able to play with Connor Bedard. So because there is that interest, I do think that the Leafs are listening in on him because they can get a bounty. And the fact that they got so close to a deal at last year's trade deadline tells me that they don't view him as precious. But probably only because of the value that he brings in. Because I know they value him a lot. Like we saw
Yeah.
that in that contract negotiation. But when you have an opportunity like this where you can bring in significant assets to your organization, you'd be foolish not to listen. So we'll see where it goes. I do think that there are teams that would spend foolish packages to get him. And if one of those packages presents himself, like, how do you say no?
Yeah, that's a good point. And remember now too, there's a different administration here. The previous administration, they almost traded him. New group there with Chayka, who knows how they view it, but I agree with you. I think that he is I wouldn't want to trade him, but you got to size up what the offers are, and if you get a good one, I think, especially if you can help your defense, I think they have to do it. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't have a Nittany Lion on here and ask about Gavin McKenna. The Leafs won the lot. I mean, that's part of this whole whirlwind of the Toronto Maple Leafs in the last couple of months here. They won the lottery. They have the first overall draft pick after spending a lot of the year worried that they were going to have to hand their pick over to the Boston Bruins as part of that Carlo trade they made last year. Gavin McKenna, I don't know how much time I think you went out and did an interview with him, so you have spent some time with him, I believe. And I know that, again, you're a Nittany Lion, so you're paying a little more attention maybe than others. Give me your thoughts on Gavin McKenna and maybe how he would fit in Toronto.
Yeah. So, I mean, the talk I got coming out of the combine was firstly, like to the Leafs' point, they might do things that are a little off the board because they keep things close to the vest. But the sense everyone left the combine was it's probably going to be Gavin McKenna. And as I've talked to people in the scouting community, he's such a special offensive talent that you better be sure if you're passing up on him. Like you can
Yeah,
pass up on him. There's great players in this draft.
yeah.
Maybe you want a Chase Reed, a defenseman. Maybe you prefer Stenberg, but like you just have to be 100% sure because that's how special Gavin is. I think Gavin has been in the spotlight for a lot of his life. He was identified at a young age as someone who was really good at hockey. And because of that, it's prepared him for a moment like this. He was tested significantly at Penn State. Harsh spotlight on him. The massive NIL deal that he signed, coming all the way from UConn, leaving the WHL, being the presumed number one pick, the legal issues that presented themselves. And the way that I think he emerged from that was even stronger. He's got a really good family support system. I've gotten to know his mom a little bit, Crystal. I've talked to her. They're humble, they're down to earth, they're family oriented. And so when everything hits the fan, he has a good core to come back to. And because of that, I just think when you look at how driven he is on the ice, he really improved from a defensive standpoint this year. When all the scouts were saying he's a perimeter player, he's one dimensional. No, he proved that he can grow. He faced tough competition, and again, how he handled all of the noise in the spotlight. I think he'd thrive in a place like Toronto.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me with the opportunity now to play college hockey for these guys. I think it's, people I think some people realize it, but I don't know if everyone realizes the difference. I mean, he could have stayed in the Western Hockey League, probably put up 150, 200 points there, and nobody would be thinking anything ever differently about Gavin McKenna. And he took that opportunity to go to Penn State, which I thought it's a great opportunity for these young guys. You see how Porter Montone had helped him. He was after his draft year, and I think, I would say that for a lot of guys, that's the time to go as well. they have such great facilities at these universities. You're playing against a different level of competition. I think he came out of it, really well because it's not easy to go through that, to come down, especially as you point out, to come from a totally different part of North America and to go down and meet all kinds of new people in a new environment and a new situation and play against tougher competition. I think he came out of it really well.
EJ, I think you're bang on there. And I think that everyone focused on the NIL money. That was the sexy headline, and that's what he was getting all the opponents' cheers about. But really, this was a bet on yourself situation. Like, it would have been
Yeah.
easy for him just to stay in the WHL, put up gaudy numbers, and say, like, look, I'm the number one pick. Instead, he challenged himself playing against men who were 4 or 5 years older than him, physically developed, and it was a pretty tough transition. Like those first couple games, he did look like a perimeter player, and he didn't look like he could handle that pace, that intensity, that physicality. But the fact that he stuck with it, he grew, he finished with the production that he hit. I mean, he was a top three scorer in the nation.
Yeah.
Led the Nittany Lions to uh, tournament berth despite a lot of injuries. He didn't have regular line mates the entire time. Aiden
Yeah.
Fink, the guy that's supposed to play with him, was injured a lot of the year. All that is to say, like, to me, if I'm an evaluator, those are big bonus points. 'Cause I'm saying he was looking at how could he prepare himself best for the NHL, and he absolutely did that.
All right, Emily. Last thing I have for you, I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. Your job, we talk about, it's all our jobs to kind of follow these things and chase down stories. There is so much that we think is going to happen maybe this summer in the league. The free agent market isn't as robust as it's been in the past. That might mean we get more trades. Give me one thing that you think maybe that is maybe not being talked about a ton that we might see happen in the summer, or one thing that's on your radar as we move into the draft and free agency and the offseason?
Oh, there's so many names swirling around. The one that I feel like would be the craziest if you had told me at this point last year, and the one that I think has a likely chance of happening, Connor Hellebuck. I really think he's going to come and want to play for A, an American market, and B, one that's in a position to win. And my eyes are on the Florida Panthers. I just feel like there's a mutual interest there. I don't know what that deal would look like. Obviously, it would involve the number 9 pick. It would have to involve a roster player from Florida. But I just feel like there's some smoke to Connor Hellebuck, and I'm really curious to see where that one goes.
All right. Well, we'll keep our eye on that one. It's going to be an interesting year. I hear these stories. These U.S. guys are all trying to kind of get together on it. Maybe like have a super team. I don't know if it's going to be easy to do that.
It would never be easy, but if anyone could do it, it would be one of the guys on the USA management staff looking at you, Billy Guerin. But to that point, I mean, you're going to trade Kirill Kaprizov to get a USA reunion? Probably not. So in
Yeah.
today's salary cap world, it's a lot of maneuvering.
No question. Well, listen, Emily, I really appreciate the time to chat with you. You're right. We didn't get a chance to talk much during the final, so at least we got a chance to catch up here. I guess I'll see you in Buffalo.
We get a hang in Buffalo. How lucky are we?
Oh,
I
boy.
will make sure we find time there.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time today for sure. Emily Kaplan at ESPN doing great work there, covering the National Hockey League. Thanks for a few minutes today, Emily. I'll see you in Buffalo.
You're the best, EJ. Anytime.
All right. That is the Toronto Sports Rush presented on the Bet Rivers Network. Everybody, have a great day.